The afternoon sun filtered through the Venetian blinds of Dr. Geoffrey Miller's office at the University of New Mexico, casting long shadows across walls lined with evolutionary psychology texts and research papers. Miller, one of the world's leading experts in evolutionary psychology and sexual selection, sat across from his colleague Dr. Sarah Chen, a behavioral psychologist specializing in female attraction patterns. Their conversation would soon delve into one of the most complex and misunderstood aspects of human psychology, the intricate web of female desire and its relationship to male self-development. The fundamental misunderstanding that most men have, Miller began, adjusting his glasses as he referenced a stack of research papers, is that they believe women's desires are mysterious or illogical. But when you understand evolutionary psychology, when you truly grasp the selection pressures that have shaped female preferences over millions of years, everything becomes crystal clear.
Dr.
Chen nodded, pulling up data from her recent studies on female attraction patterns across different cultures. What we've discovered through extensive cross-cultural research is that women's secret desires aren't actually secret at all. They're deeply embedded biological imperatives that have been consistent across every human society we've studied. The challenge is that modern society has created a disconnect between these primal drives and conscious awareness. Miller leaned forward, his passion for the subject evident. Let's start with the basics. When we examine female sexual selection throughout human evolution, we see three primary factors that have consistently influenced mate choice. First is genetic fitness indicators, signs that a potential mate carries superior genes that would benefit offspring. Second is resource acquisition ability, the capacity to provide security and resources for child rearing. Third, and perhaps most crucial in modern contexts, is social dominance and status within hierarchical structures. The discussion was grounded in decades of research, from Robert Triver's groundbreaking work on parental investment theory to David Buss's comprehensive studies on human mating psychology. Miller's own research had contributed significantly to understanding how intelligence, creativity, and personality traits function as fitness indicators in sexual selection. Here's where it gets particularly interesting, Dr. Chen interjected, referencing her laptop screen. Our neuroimaging studies show that when women evaluate potential partners, different neural networks activate depending on where they are in their menstrual cycle. During ovulation, when fertility peaks, brain regions associated with detecting genetic quality become hyperactive. Women become unconsciously attuned to indicators of physical health, symmetry, testosterone markers, and what we call good genes indicators. Miller picked up the thread. But outside of ovulation, entirely different neural circuits take precedence. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for long-term planning and evaluation, becomes more active. During these phases, women prioritize indicators of commitment, emotional stability, resource potential, and what we might call good dad characteristics. This dual nature of female attraction, what researchers termed the dual mating strategy, formed the foundation of understanding women's complex desire patterns. But the implications went far deeper than simple physical attraction. Dr. Chen pulled up brain scan images on her tablet. What's fascinating is that these aren't conscious processes. Women aren't deliberately thinking, I need to evaluate this man's genetic fitness versus his provider potential. These are automatic, unconscious evaluations happening below the threshold of awareness. This is why so many women report feeling confused by their own attractions. They're experiencing the output of evolutionary programs they can't consciously access. Miller stood and walked to his whiteboard, beginning to sketch out interconnected systems. This brings us to the first major category of what people call women's secret desires. Let's call it the genetic fitness suite. This includes attraction to physical indicators of high testosterone, facial masculinity, body muscularity, deep voice patterns, but it also includes behavioral indicators, confidence, assertiveness, the ability to handle social pressure without breaking frame. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Here's where most men go wrong. They think this means becoming hypermasculine in an obvious, try-hard way. But evolution is far more sophisticated than that. Women have evolved to detect authentic markers versus artificial displays. A man who's genuinely confident because he's developed real competencies will trigger different responses than a man who's performing confidence to compensate for insecurity. Dr. Chen added, our eye-tracking studies reveal that women spend significantly more time focusing on behavioral cues than physical ones when evaluating potential partners. Micro-expressions, posture changes under stress, voice tonality shifts during challenging conversations. These subtle indicators provide much more reliable information about a man's true psychological state than his obvious physical attributes. The conversation shifted to examining specific research findings. Miller referenced a landmark study by David Putz at Pennsylvania State University that used voice analysis software to correlate vocal masculinity with hormonal profiles. What Putz discovered was remarkable. Women could accurately assess male testosterone levels just by listening to voice recordings. More importantly, their attraction responses correlated directly with these assessments, but only during their fertile phases. This leads to a crucial insight, Dr. Chen said, pulling up her own research data. Women aren't consciously aware they're making these evaluations, which means they can't articulate them directly. When asked what they find attractive, women will often give socially acceptable answers: kindness, sense of humor, shared interests. These qualities matter enormously for long-term compatibility, but they're not the primary drivers of initial sexual attraction. Miller returned to his whiteboard, adding more interconnected elements to his diagram. The second major category involves status and social dominance. But again, this is where popular understanding gets it completely wrong. Most men think status means flashy displays of wealth or aggressive dominance behaviors, but human status hierarchies are far more complex than dominance hierarchies in other species. He began sketching hierarchical structures in hunter-gatherer societies, the environment where human psychology evolved. Status was multidimensional. There were skilled hunters who provided resources, talented craftsmen who created valuable tools, effective leaders who resolved conflicts, and knowledgeable individuals who possessed crucial survival information. Each of these roles conferred status and attractiveness to women, but through different mechanisms. Dr. Chen nodded, referencing cross-cultural anthropological data on her screen. Our analysis of 127 different cultures shows consistent patterns. Women are attracted to men who demonstrate competence within their society's value systems. In warrior cultures, that might be fighting ability. In knowledge-based societies, it might be intellectual prowess or creative achievement. The common thread is demonstrated excellence that creates value for the social group. This is why modern dating advice often fails so spectacularly, Miller continued. It focuses on surface-level status symbols rather than the underlying psychological drivers. A man driving an expensive car might attract attention, but if that car represents borrowed money and financial irresponsibility, the initial attraction quickly reverses once women's more sophisticated evaluation systems engage. The discussion delved deeper into the neurochemistry of attraction. Dr. Chen explained how different types of male behavior triggered distinct hormonal responses in women. When women encounter men displaying authentic competence and controlled confidence, we see increases in estrogen and oxytocin, hormones associated with pair bonding and sexual receptivity. But when they encounter men whose confidence seems forced or compensatory, stress hormones like cortisol increase instead. Miller added biological context. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. A woman who chose a mate based on false signals of genetic fitness or resource potential would face serious reproductive consequences. Natural selection would strongly favor psychological mechanisms that could distinguish authentic quality indicators from deceptive displays. This led to exploring the third major category of female attraction drivers, what Miller termed emotional and psychological fitness indicators. This category encompassed traits that signaled a man's ability to form stable pair bonds, contribute to child rearing, and maintain long-term relationships despite challenges. Emotional regulation is probably the most underappreciated attraction factor. Chen explained, showing neuroimaging data. Women's brains show strong positive responses to men who can remain calm and composed under pressure, who can process emotions without being overwhelmed by them, and who can provide emotional stability during stressful situations. Miller expanded on this concept. Think about it evolutionarily. A woman in our ancestral environment who chose a mate prone to emotional volatility, rage, or psychological instability would face constant threats not just to herself but to her offspring. Children require consistent care and protection for many years. A psychologically unstable partner would be a liability rather than an asset. The conversation turned to examining how these insights connected to the second part of their discussion, the relationship between understanding female psychology and male self-development. Miller walked to his bookshelf and retrieved several volumes on philosophy and psychology, including works by Carl Jung, Nietzsche, and modern researchers in post-traumatic growth. This brings us to a profound paradox, Miller said, settling back into his chair. The men who are most successful with women are often those who are least focused on women's approval. They're focused instead on becoming the highest version of themselves, on developing real competencies and authentic confidence. There's something about this self-focus that women find irresistibly attractive. Dr. Chen pulled up longitudinal studies tracking male development patterns. We've been following a cohort of men for over 8 years now, monitoring their personal development efforts and their dating success. The correlation is striking. Men who engage in serious self-improvement work, who face their weaknesses directly and work to overcome them, showed dramatic improvements not just in relationship success, but in overall life satisfaction. But here's the key insight, Miller emphasized, returning to his whiteboard. This isn't about self-improvement for the sake of attracting women. It's about self-improvement for the sake of becoming a more complete, actualized human being. Women seem to have evolved sophisticated detection mechanisms for distinguishing between men who are improving themselves authentically versus those who are doing it primarily to get female approval. The discussion explored the psychological mechanisms underlying this phenomena. Miller referenced research by psychologist Tim Kasser on intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. When men pursue self-development for external validation, whether from women, society, or peers, they tend to develop what we might call hollow confidence. It looks impressive on the surface but lacks the deep-rootedness that comes from intrinsic motivation. Dr. Chen added neurobiological context. Functional MRI studies show that people pursuing intrinsically motivated goals activate different brain networks than those pursuing extrinsically motivated ones. Intrinsic motivation engages regions associated with genuine satisfaction and well-being. Extrinsic motivation primarily activates stress and reward-seeking circuits. Women appear to be unconsciously detecting these different neural states. Miller continued, a man who's developed genuine competence and confidence through intrinsic motivation carries himself differently, speaks differently, and responds to challenges differently than a man who's developed surface-level skills for external validation. This led to exploring the concept of psychological strength and resilience, what the document's title referred to as becoming unbreakable through destroying one's weak self. Miller referenced research in post-traumatic growth and adversarial growth theory. There's something paradoxical about psychological strength, he explained. It's not about becoming invulnerable or emotionally numb. It's about becoming so comfortable with your own vulnerabilities and limitations that external criticism or rejection can't destabilize your sense of self. Dr. Chen showed data from her studies on resilient individuals. We've identified what we call anti-fragile personality traits, characteristics that actually become stronger when exposed to stress rather than weaker. These include tolerance for uncertainty, ability to find meaning in adversity, commitment to personal growth despite setbacks, and what we term outcome independence, the ability to pursue goals regardless of external validation. Miller elaborated on the evolutionary basis for these traits. In our ancestral environment, individuals who could maintain psychological stability despite challenges, tribal conflicts, resource scarcity, social rejection were more likely to survive and reproduce. But more than that, they were more attractive as potential partners because they represented stability and security. The conversation explored how modern society had created unique challenges for male psychological development. Miller referenced sociologist Philip Zimbardo's research on the demise of guys, and psychologist Jordan Peterson's work on male development and responsibility. Modern Western society has, in many ways, eliminated the traditional challenges that forged male psychological strength, Miller observed. Physical hardship, clear rites of passage, defined social roles. These structures provided frameworks for boys to develop into psychologically mature men. Without them, many modern men remain in extended adolescence, seeking validation and avoiding the difficult work of genuine self-development. Dr. Chen presented data showing declining rates of psychological maturity markers among young adults over the past several decades. We're seeing increases in anxiety, depression, and what we might call fragile self-esteem, self-worth, that depends heavily on external validation. This creates a vicious cycle where men become increasingly desperate for female approval while becoming less attractive to the women they're trying to please. The discussion turned to practical applications of these insights. Miller emphasized that understanding female psychology wasn't about manipulation or exploitation, but but about becoming the type of man that women naturally find attractive. Someone who had developed genuine strength, competence, and emotional maturity. The pathway involves what I call conscious adversity, he explained. Since modern society no longer provides natural challenges that forge psychological strength, men must deliberately create challenges for themselves. This might involve physical training that pushes their limits, intellectual pursuits that stretch their capabilities, or emotional work that addresses their deepest fears and insecurities. Dr. Chen added research on deliberate practice and skill acquisition. What we found is that men who engage in systematic skill development, whether physical, intellectual, creative, or social, show improvements not just in those specific areas, but in overall confidence and emotional regulation. There's something about the process of facing difficulty and overcoming it that creates fundamental changes in personality structure. Miller walked to his window, looking out at the campus beyond. This connects to what Nietzsche wrote about becoming what one is, the process of stripping away false personas and social conditioning to discover one's authentic self. But it's not a passive process of self-discovery. It requires actively confronting the parts of yourself that you'd rather ignore. The conversation explored the psychological concept of shadow work, the process of acknowledging and integrating the repressed or denied aspects of personality. Miller referenced Carl Jung's writings on individuation and modern research on psychological integration. Most men are carrying around what we might call a shadow self, the weak, needy, insecure parts of their personality that they try to hide from the world, he explained. But trying to suppress these aspects actually gives them more power over your behavior. The path to genuine strength involves acknowledging these weaknesses and consciously working to transform them. Dr. Chen presented case studies from her therapeutic work with men. We've developed what we call integrated masculinity development, a process that combines traditional strength-building activities with emotional intelligence work and values clarification. Men who complete this program show significant improvements not just in dating success, but in overall life satisfaction, career achievement, and relationship quality. The program involved several key components: physical challenges that built genuine confidence through achieved competence, intellectual pursuits that developed critical thinking and expertise, emotional regulation training that built resilience and stability, social skills development focused on authentic communication rather than manipulation, and values clarification work that helped men identify their core principles and live according to them regardless of external pressure. The interesting finding, Dr. Chen continued, is that men who go through this development process often report that dating becomes almost effortless, not because they're using techniques or strategies, but because they've become genuinely attractive through authentic self-development. Miller returned to the biological basis for these effects. When a man has done the work to develop genuine competence, emotional stability, and authentic confidence, he naturally displays the behaviors that women find attractive. His posture, voice tonality, eye contact patterns, stress responses, all of these change in ways that trigger positive responses from women. The discussion explored specific examples of how this transformation manifested behavior. Men who had developed genuine confidence maintained steady eye contact without staring aggressively, spoke with natural vocal authority without forcing it, displayed relaxed but attentive body language, handled social challenges calmly rather than reactively, expressed opinions confidently without being closed-minded, and showed interest in women without neediness or desperation. The paradox, Miller observed, is that the less a man needs women's validation, the more attractive he becomes to women. This isn't because women want to be ignored or treated poorly. It's because neediness and validation seeking signal psychological weakness and insecurity, traits that trigger avoidance responses rather than attraction. Dr. Chen explained the neurological basis for this response. When women encounter men who seem emotionally dependent or validation-seeking, brain regions associated with caretaking rather than sexual attraction become active.
A man gets categorized as someone who needs to be taken care of, rather than someone who could provide strength and stability.
The conversation turned to examining the relationship between self-respect and attractiveness.
Miller referenced research showing that individuals with healthy self-esteem defined as stable self-regard that doesn't fluctuate based on external feedback were consistently rated as more attractive across multiple studies. Self-respect isn't arrogance or narcissism, he clarified. It's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth regardless of others' opinions. When a man has genuine self-respect, He doesn't need to prove himself constantly or seek validation from every interaction. This led to discussing boundaries and their role in attraction. Dr. Xia Chen presented research showing that individuals who maintained clear personal boundaries, who could say no to unreasonable requests and maintain their standards despite social pressure, were perceived as more attractive and were more successful in both dating and relationships. Boundaries aren't about being inflexible or uncaring, she explained. They're about having such a clear sense of your own values and priorities that you won't compromise them for temporary approval. Women find this incredibly attractive because it signals psychological strength and integrity. Miller expanded on the evolutionary psychology behind boundary attraction. From a female perspective, a man who can't maintain boundaries with others probably won't be able to maintain boundaries when it comes to protecting her and their potential offspring. Boundary setting ability is actually a fitness indicator. It suggests someone who can stand up to challenges and protect what matters to them. The discussion explored how modern dating culture often discouraged healthy boundary setting, encouraging men to be overly accommodating and approval-seeking. Miller referenced research showing that men who were too nice, defined as prioritizing others' approval over their own values, were consistently less successful in romantic relationships. This doesn't mean being selfish or inconsiderate, he clarified. It means having such a strong sense of your own worth and direction that you don't need to compromise your integrity to gain approval. Women respect men who respect themselves. Dr. Chen presented longitudinal data tracking men's development over time. What we see consistently is that men who do the work to develop genuine self-respect and clear boundaries become not just more attractive to women, but more successful in all areas of life. They get promoted more often, they have better friendships, they report higher life satisfaction. The conversation turned to the role of purpose and mission in male development. Miller referenced Viktor Frankl's work on meaning and purpose, as well as modern research on goal orientation and life satisfaction. One of the most attractive qualities a man can possess is a sense of purpose that transcends immediate gratification, he explained. When a man is genuinely committed to something meaningful, whether it's a career mission, creative pursuit, or contribution to society, he naturally becomes more attractive because he's not desperate for validation from any single source. Dr. Chen showed brain imaging data comparing men with clear life purposes to those without. Men with strong sense of purpose showed different neural activation patterns. They're less reactive to social rejection, more persistent in the face of obstacles, and more emotionally stable overall. These changes manifest in behaviors that women find highly attractive. This led to exploring the concept of outcome independence, the ability to pursue goals and maintain emotional stability regardless of specific outcomes. Miller explained how this trait developed through facing fears and accepting uncertainty. Most men are paralyzed by fear of rejection or failure, he observed. But when a man has faced his fears repeatedly and learned that he can handle whatever outcomes arise, he becomes fundamentally different. He can take risks, express himself authentically, and pursue what he wants without being controlled by fear. Dr. Chen presented case studies of men who had developed outcome independence through various challenges, starting businesses, learning difficult skills, facing social fears, or overcoming personal limitations. The common thread is that they all went through periods of deliberate discomfort and uncertainty. They learned that they could handle failure, rejection, and disappointment without being destroyed by them. The conversation explored how this translated to interactions with women. Men who had developed outcome independence could approach women they found attractive without neediness, express their interest clearly without fear of rejection, maintain their personality and values regardless of women's responses, end relationships that weren't working without desperation, and attract higher quality partners because they weren't settling out of fear. The irony, Miller noted, is that men who need women's approval the least tend to get it the most. This isn't because women are perverse or enjoy playing games. It's because neediness signals weakness, while outcome independence signals strength. As their conversation continued, Miller and Dr. Chen explored the deeper philosophical implications of their research. The journey from weakness to strength, from neediness to outcome independence, represented more than just a strategy for dating success. It was a fundamental transformation of character. What we're really talking about, Miller reflected, is the ancient philosophical concept of self-actualization, the process of becoming fully who you're capable of being. of actualizing your potential rather than remaining trapped in limited, fearful versions of yourself. Dr. Chen referenced research on post-traumatic growth and adversarial growth. Human beings have a remarkable capacity to not just survive difficult experiences but to become stronger through them. But this doesn't happen automatically. It requires conscious effort, deliberate practice, and willingness to face discomfort. The discussion explored how this connected to attraction and relationships. Women weren't just attracted to strong men because of evolutionary programming. They were attracted to the qualities that made someone genuinely good to be around. Emotional stability, genuine confidence, clear boundaries, sense of purpose. These traits created better relationships for everyone involved. This is why the most successful approach to dating isn't about learning techniques or strategies, Miller emphasized. It's about becoming someone worth dating. When you've done the work to develop genuine strength and emotional maturity, healthy relationships become natural and effortless. Dr. Chen presented final data from their longitudinal studies. Men who go through genuine self-development processes don't just become more successful with women, they become more successful as human beings. They report higher life satisfaction, better friendships, more career success, and greater sense of meaning and purpose. The research painted a clear picture. The path to becoming attractive to high-quality women was identical to the path to becoming a high-quality man. There were no shortcuts, no techniques that could substitute for genuine character development. But for men willing to do the work, the rewards extended far beyond dating success. Miller concluded their discussion by returning to the paradox they had identified. The men who destroy their weak selves, who face their fears, develop genuine competence, and build authentic confidence, become psychologically unbreakable, not because they're invulnerable, but because they've learned they can handle whatever life brings them. And paradoxically, Dr. Bad Parsity, Dr. Dabber, Chen added, this psychological strength, developed for its own sake rather than to attract women, becomes precisely what women find most attractive. The man who needs no one's validation becomes the man everyone wants to validate. Their research revealed a fundamental truth about human psychology and relationships. Genuine strength attracts genuine love, authentic confidence inspires authentic respect, and the journey to become unbreakable by others begins with honestly confronting and transforming the breakable parts of oneself. The afternoon sun had moved across the sky during their lengthy discussion, now casting different shadows across Miller's office. But the insights they had explored would continue to illuminate the path forward, for any man willing to undertake the challenging but rewarding journey from weakness to strength, from neediness to outcome independence, from broken to unbreakable. The science was clear, the psychology was understood, and the pathway was available to anyone with the courage to walk it. The only question remaining was who would choose to begin the transformation and who would remain trapped in patterns that served neither themselves nor the women they hoped to attract. Through understanding the psychology behind women's desires and committing to the destruction of one's weak self, a man could become not just unbreakable by others, but genuinely attractive to those he hoped to attract. The secret was that there was no secret, only the eternal human challenge of becoming worthy of what one hoped to receive. As Miller and Dr. Chen packed up their research materials, both understood they had spent the afternoon exploring more than academic concepts. They had mapped the territory of human transformation, the journey from who we are to who we could become, and the mysterious alchemy by which authentic strength becomes irresistibly attractive to others. The research would continue, the data would be published, and the insights would be shared. But the most important work, the individual journey of self-transformation, could only be undertaken by each person willing to destroy their weak self and build something stronger in its place. In the end, the psychology behind women's desires and the path to unbreakable masculinity revealed themselves to be two aspects of the same fundamental truth. Authentic strength, developed for its own sake, becomes the foundation upon which all other successes are built.